Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're just a little bit past 2 weeks now till Election Day 2025, where there are going to be a lot of important races that are up, including the 2025 New Jersey's governor's race. I've done videos in the past covering this race, but I'm now covering this video today with about 2 weeks ago until Election Day, where things stand and what in particular am I watching for that I think is very important to know going into Election Day. So first things first, let's get into the basics of this race. Really briefly here, the race is open due to the fact that the governor, Phil Murphy, is currently, or is term limited, he's currently serving out his second term, which he narrowly won back in 2021, and he will be term limited and cannot run again. Now the two parties have nominated, the Democrats have nominated Mikey Sherrill to be their Democratic nominee, and the Republicans have nominated Jack Ciattarelli to be their Republican nominee in the general election. Now, this race is very close right now, heading into the final 2 weeks of the campaign. New Jersey is a state that has a long history of being a Democratic state at the presidential and Senate level, but at the governor level has been a little bit more willing to elect Republicans for governor, and it recently had a Republican governor through 2017 when Chris Christie served out his second term as governor, and then Phil Murphy won in 2017, taking over as governor of the state of New Jersey. So New Jersey has elected Republicans in the past, and after 2 terms of Phil Murphy, there's a possibility that could be happening again in 2025. But Mikey Sherrill is trying to keep the state blue for the Democrats in the state of New Jersey. Now, what we've all come to see right now is what's going on with the general election. For one, the predictions on this race are showing a very tight competitive race, but one that the Democrat Mikey Sherrill is nearly favored in. The Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, Salvador's Crystal Ball, and Race to the White House, 4 very well notable prediction websites, all have this race currently listed as lean Democrat. Now, lean Democrat could mean different things depending on who you ask, but the general consensus, a lean Democratic ranking, is usually less than a 5% victory, but more than a 1% victory in terms of the final election results when everything is said and done. That's where the predictions currently have it at this point in the prediction rankings. Now, for the polling, it's right along with those numbers. The most up-to-date polling averages we have are around a 4-point margin for Real Clear Politics and Decision Desk HQ. Race to the White House is not too far off of that, of 4.5, and Vote Hub is Mikey Sherrill at 5.5. An average of these 4 has Sherrill leading by 4.2% over Jack Ciattarelli. So this is a very interesting race right now, because it does clearly show Mikey Sherrill is leading in this race. And some of the things I've talked about in the weeks beforehand are still pretty prevalent, which is that Mikey Sherrill's support has gone up a little bit in the last few weeks, but that she's still not at the 50% number. Now, 50% in politics doesn't really mean everything. You can win a race without reaching 50% depending on the election system of your state. But if you're getting above 50% in the vote, there's pretty much no way you're going to lose unless there's a ranked choice voting situation going on and you don't end up reaching 50% come election day. But Sherrill's polling on average right around 48 to 48.5% on most polling averages, which as a Democrat is not obviously 50%, but you're in a pretty strong polling position, especially when you look at the fact that there is still a pretty decent sizable amount of third-party voters or undecided voters left at this current point in time. Now, that's where the question of this race really comes down to, is who are these undecided voters? Are these people that are all going to vote third party? Probably not. Are these voters that are quietly voting for Mikey Sherrill or quietly voting for Jack Ciattarelli and just don't want to say in polls who they're going to support? That definitely could be the case. Or are these people who are genuinely not sure who they're going to vote for yet? Maybe they don't like the job Phil Murphy is doing as governor, but they voted for Democrats in the past and they're not sure if they want to vote for a Republican this time. Who are these undecided voters is ultimately going to make the difference. Could these be voters that maybe know they're going to vote one way or the other for Sherrill or Ciattarelli, and they just don't want to say, they'd rather just go vote quietly and not discuss it and let the election results speak for themselves? That could certainly be the case. But when you look at the consensus rankings here, the polling data is not too dissimilar from what it was back in 2021, which can be both a good and a bad thing for the Republican Jack Ciattarelli, and kind of be a good or a bad thing for the Democrat Mikey Sherrill as well. Now, first, I'll go from the Republican side. Jack Ciattarelli, on average in these polling averages, has 43.9, 44.6, 43.9, and 43.5, an average of 44%. He is right around that lower to middle part of the 40s, which, to be point blank and be quite frankly here, that's not good enough for a candidate in a race to feel comfortable that they can win. It's really not. Now, the number one argument used for Jack Ciattarelli is what happened in 2021, where he was polling against the Democratic governor Phil Murphy with 42.7% of the vote when everything was said and done on the Real Clear Politics polling average. Now, there has been more polling in this race than there was in the 2021 governor's race in New Jersey, and that's because it's a lot more of interest. And after the 2024 presidential results, where it was pretty close between Harris and Trump, a lot more than expected, and 2021 was so competitive, more eyes are on New Jersey to see will this thing ultimately end up being close. But in this one, Phil Murphy was already breaking 50% of the vote. So for Murphy to lose this race, it would have to be a pretty clear sign that Murphy or the polls were wrong, and wrong by a pretty decent amount, for Phil Murphy not to win, that he was already breaking 50%. Which is why I'm bringing up the point of that 50 number in this race, because Mikey Sherrill is not breaking 50% of the vote as of today, which, again, I'm recording this now on Tuesday, so we still have 2 weeks to go in the campaign, now a little bit less than 2 weeks to go, and there is still enough time for Mikey Sherrill to consolidate support heading into Election Day, and by the end of October, the first day of November, she may very well be at that 49-50% number, and she can go into Election Day feeling more and more confident that she's going to win. But that's not to say Mikey Sherrill should not be confident that she's not winning this race right now, because the polling data right now seems to suggest that Mikey Sherrill is winning this race and Jack Ciattarelli is trailing. However, if 2021 replicates itself, where Jack Ciattarelli wins a large amount of the undecided voters that are out there, or the voters who are just not saying who they are supporting, if Ciattarelli can do so, there's enough math this time around to beat Mikey Sherrill and be the next Republican governor of New Jersey, whereas last time around, even though Ciattarelli won most of the undecided vote, there wasn't really as much of a path due to the fact that Phil Murphy already had so many Democrats consolidated behind him. So Ciattarelli has a path to win here, but for him to win, he needs to win the 44% that he's already carrying. I think the 44% number for Ciattarelli is probably the floor in this race for him. I don't think he's going to go below that number, but the question is, how much of that 8% or so that is undecided third party can Ciattarelli win? And can he get a sizable, large amount? Because even though the polling average is only down by about 4.2% between Ciattarelli and Sherrill, that means Ciattarelli has to win more, not only more than half of that number to win, but he needs to win roughly 3/4 of that undecided vote just to catch Mikey Sherrill and then have enough to win too. It's going to be a razor-thin margin if Jack Ciattarelli can end up pulling off the upset in this race. Which is why I think when the rankings say Mikey Sherrill's leading by a lean Democratic margin, I think that's correct, because the way that she's currently running in the polling data thus far, yes, it's not as good as Phil Murphy in 2021, but I do think Mikey Sherrill is having a lead in this race right now, and the polling that she's in, around 48.5% or so, depending on the polling average that you're looking at, is putting her in a very strong position heading into the final 2 weeks of the campaign, where the advertising is going to pick up, the voter, I would say, participation and voter retention is going to pick up as well. And if Sherrill's already around 48.5%, I think she's in a strong enough position that heading into Election Day, she'll probably feel more confident than not that she's going to win. I don't really want to make any definite statements, because when elections like these ones, especially governor's races, can be very tricky. I mean, we saw that with 2024 in the presidential election. We saw that with the primary for the New York City mayor in 2025, that elections can be really unpredictable, especially when things look like they're super close and there's enough undecided vote left out there that can swing things one way or the other. Again, almost like we saw in 2021 in the New Jersey governor's race with Phil Murphy versus Jack Ciattarelli. It ended up only being a 3-point race despite an 8-point lead in the polls for Murphy over Ciattarelli. But this time around, there is enough undecided vote for Jack Ciattarelli to catch Mikey Sherrill, but I still think Mikey Sherrill has a lead in this race, and one of the largest reasons being is the fact that we're doing this election in 2025 and not 2021, where you talk about the governor's elections right after the presidential race, they almost always go the opposite of the party in the White House. For instance, 2021, Joe Biden, the Democrat, was president. The Republicans did very well. They did not win New Jersey, but they did much better than they usually would, and they won Virginia. 2025, Donald Trump is the president. He is a Republican. The Democrats should be poised for a very good night. So if the Republicans were able to win the New Jersey governor election in 2025, it would be a real breaking of history here. And just when you go through all the numbers here and you see where Jack Ciattarelli, the Republicans, polling, it's not impossible for him to win. But you're looking at these numbers, he's not getting really higher in most instances than 44% in the polling. 44% has become Ciattarelli's sort of floor in this race, but the highest he's ever gotten was a Republican poll where he got 46% of the vote. Where Mikey Sherrill, you can see her getting around 49, 50%, 51% at times, depending on the poll that you're looking at. And that's a legitimate concern for Ciattarelli in that he ran for governor in 2021. Now he's running for governor again in 2025. People are going to know his name. They're going to know who he is, likely going to know what he stands for. And yet he's still only getting around 44% of the vote, which is enough to keep him competitive in this race, but it's not enough to say comfortably, yeah, I'm 100% sure he's running away with this and he could legitimately win this race. Whereas Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat, she may be underperforming by about a point or two from where a Democrat in this race would probably rather be right now, but she's still in a strong enough position that heading into it, it's going to be a close race, but I think she's in a strong enough position to say she's the narrow favorite as of right now. Just to illustrate this a little bit further and a little bit better, I love this chart that Decision Desk HQ has on their website tracking the polling averages of Sherrill versus Ciattarelli, where a few things are going on here. For one, you can see over the trend over the last few months since about June 1st that Sherrill is leading in this race over Ciattarelli, though in the final month or so, the race is definitely narrowed up. On September 21st, Sherrill led Ciattarelli 47.6 to 39.4 for Ciattarelli. What seemed to happen here is a lot more Republicans and Republican-leaning independents made up their decisions on Jack Ciattarelli and whether or not to support him. Because Sherrill only went from 47.6 up to about 48.6 from that time period, whereas Ciattarelli went up 39.4 to 44.6. So as Ciattarelli ran about 5 points in the polls, Sherrill rose only about 1 point in the polls. But now the question is going to be, what happens when everything is said and done? Another important point here also is the third-party number as well, because there are two third-party candidates on the ballot in New Jersey, and even though they're not going to be a very large percentage of votes, they're going to be probably around combined 2.5%, 3% or so. That could be enough to swing this election if things are very close. So let's say hypothetically the third-party vote totals up to about 2.5%. That would leave roughly 97.5% of the vote left outstanding. And if you took that 97.5 and divided it by 2, just both candidates getting splitting it in half, it would be about 48.75% left remaining. So when you factor in the third-party vote here, assuming it's 2.5%, it could be more, it could be less. When you look at the polling data in the race right now, Mikey Sherrill's already at 48.6%, meaning that if the estimates are correct for how much the third-party vote is taken away, around 2.5% or so, Mikey Sherrill may already be at that number to win this race without even having to break above that 50% number, which he very well may do on election night. Whereas Jack Ciattarelli right now at 44.6, he's certainly gaining ground. He's gained about 5 points in the last 2 months or so, and even in the last week, he went from 43.6 up to 44.6. So Ciattarelli is now rising certainly in the polls in the final few days here, but is it going to be enough to ultimately catch Mikey Sherrill is going to be the question. Because Sherrill's polling numbers has been definitely more consistent, I would say, than Ciattarelli's is. She's been hovering around 46, 47% or so most of the time, and it's just recently gone up to around 48.5%. She's not really going above 50% too much. She hasn't been above 50% since about June 11th, whereas Ciattarelli has been the one whose numbers have seen the most growth in the campaign. But when you look at these numbers here, Sherrill's getting 48.6%, Ciattarelli is getting 44.6%. Let's just look at some past examples of races in New Jersey here. In the presidential level, Donald Trump got roughly 45.9% of the vote in 2024. 45.9%, where Kamala Harris got 51.79%. Let's look at the governor's race from 2021, as that's probably the most relevant, the one to look at compared to this. Here, Jack Ciattarelli was able to get of the vote against Phil Murphy. Now, 2017, it was a very great night for the Democrats in New Jersey. I don't think we're going to see this, but the Republican only got 41.89%. So Jack Ciattarelli, when you look at this race, is clearly outperforming the Republican from 2017 after 2 terms of Chris Christie as governor. Where at the same time, in the polling data right now, it's a closer race between Sherrill and Ciattarelli. There's a lot more undecided vote, and voters that need to make up their minds or have their minds made up already and just are not saying who they are supporting, that this race can be won by both Sherrill and Ciattarelli as of today. But when you look at the amount of vote that's left outstanding and who currently has a lead here, it looks more like Mikey Sherrill's the one that's going to pull this out than Jack Ciattarelli, basing that she's just closer to the top already. And the trend seemed to suggest that Ciattarelli is the one trending up. Sherrill's more remaining about the same. She's not really trending up or down too much. She's more remaining stagnant here. Ciattarelli's the one trending up, but with only 2 weeks left to go in the campaign, can Ciattarelli basically gain another 4 to 5 points in the next 2 weeks to pass Sherrill? That's going to be the question when everything is said and done. And lastly, just to show, this is a confidence interval that it shows a really, I think, a really great way of kind of looking at this race and looking at how the race is going and the ranges and sort of how this race goes. The only time Jack Ciattarelli has even crossed paths with Mikey Sherrill in the confidence interval has been in the last month or so, showing that there is a legitimate possibility that on the high end of Ciattarelli could potentially catch Mikey Sherrill. If Mikey Sherrill falls on the low end of what her numbers are in the middle end of the numbers, there is a slight path for Ciattarelli to win this race. But kind of like everything I've gone over in this video suggests, I think Ciattarelli, though it's going to be a close race, and I definitely think it's going to be under 10 points, I'm decently confident it's going to be under 5. I'm starting to see Mikey Sherrill, the way she's polling now, maybe right around 5 to 5.5% or so. I think it's going to be a close race. I'm just skeptical if Jack Ciattarelli has enough support with the amount of undecided voters that are remaining. Can Ciattarelli pull this out? If this election was taking place in 2021 between Mikey Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli, not only do I think Ciattarelli could win this race, I think there's a very good chance Ciattarelli may even be leading in the polls at this current point in time. But given the election environment of 2025, to say that Jack Ciattarelli is going to win this race when pretty much every single factor in this election would suggest that Ciattarelli probably won't is a little bit of a stretch at this current point in time. Now, again, we have 2 weeks to go, so we have to wait and see what happens over the next 2 weeks. If any numbers break or any polling data breaks or any early voting numbers come out that show Republicans way outperforming expectations, it's still possible Ciattarelli can win. But I think as of right now, I think the Republican is likely to lose this race to the Democrat Mikey Sherrill. The question is going to be, what do the margins end up being? The past few weeks, I've had this prediction, and so far I'm sticking to it, where Mikey Sherrill I have winning the New Jersey governor's race in the lean Democratic margin. Now, as I mentioned, lean Democrat can go anywhere from 5 points to 1 point. I'm currently on the higher end of that number, around 4.5%. It's possible, like I mentioned, it breaks 5% of the vote. I think kind of 4.5 to 5 is sort of the little bit of a range that I have right now for this race. I think Mikey Sherrill is leading Jack Ciattarelli as of today. The election held today, I think Sherrill would win by that 4.5 point margin. But this is certainly a very close race, and one that with 2 weeks to go, it's going to be very fascinating to watch how things develop, how things unfold, what the polls say, early voting data, what that all says, because I think Mikey Sherrill is winning. I think Mikey Sherrill will win, but I certainly don't think it's a 100% guarantee that Jack Ciattarelli can't win either. So this is going to be a very close race and a very exciting one to watch out for. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and also stay tuned. I have some very exciting videos planned coming out next week and in the final few days of this 2025 cycle that you're not going to want to miss. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2025 Virginia governor election with now less than 2 weeks to go until election day. I just did New Jersey's governor's race yesterday, so I'm doing Virginia now. Make sure to check the New Jersey one out if you have not yet done so after this video, as well as I think it's also a very good one, a good video for you to go check out. So the Commonwealth of Virginia. the 2025 Virginia governor election. I've covered this a few times now, but in the final few days, let's go over it again. This is the Virginia governor's race. It is an open race due to the fact that Glenn Youngkin, the Republican incumbent governor, who won a very close election in 2021, is term limited per Virginia's constitutional law that a governor cannot seek consecutive back-to-back terms. So a governor or a past governor like Terry McAuliffe, for instance, was able to run for governor again in 2021 because you can't serve consecutive terms, but you can serve a second term. You have to wait for the term after you to expire, though, and then you can run again. So Youngkin is term limited, and it is an open race. Now, this is an immediate top target for the Democrats, as Virginia was won by former Vice President Kamala Harris by a little bit under 6 points in 2024. Though that is pretty decently competitive, the Democrats certainly are eyeing this state. And it became very apparent early on that the two candidates in this race were going to be former U.S. Representative for the Democrats, Abigail Spanberger, and the current Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia, or Commonwealth of Virginia, Winsome Earle-Sears. So we knew for a while this was going to be the matchup, and these two have been campaigning as basically the general election nominees for a very long time now. As for the general election right now, the predictions on this race are pretty solid. That Cook Political Report, Sabra Crystal Ball, and Race to the White House all have this race listed as likely for the Democrats. This would also be a flip from the Republicans to Democrats from red to blue. So Inside Elections does have this race listed as lean Democrat as of August 28th. Just to give you an idea, because lean, likely, safe, it can all mean different things, whereas likely Democrat typically means a margin of victory of in between 5 and 15%. Now, how this race goes, we're going to go over all that, but that's what likely usually means for the margin of victory, is somewhere in between 5 and 15. Now, what we all came here for, the polling on this race has shown in the last few weeks. We've had some more polls come out since the last real in-depth breakdown video. Several of them have been Republican pollsters, and a few have been Democrat pollsters as well, but even still, this is shown to be a race that Abigail Spanberger certainly seems to be winning, even in the Republican polls, which I've reiterated in some past videos as well, but I'll say it again in this one. When it's a Republican or Democratic poll, I usually shift the margin of victory for one candidate over the other in that race or in that poll by roughly around 5 points to account for the bias of the pollster and doing it for the party that they support, the candidate they support. So, for instance, this Qantas Insights poll, which shows Spanberger leading over Sears by about 5 points, I would roughly shift this one by about 10 or about 5 points or so, bringing it up to 10 points to account for the bias of the Republican pollster there. So, with this and with the polling averages, Abigail Spanberger now leads by 6.1% from Decision Desk, Race to the White House 7.5%, Real Clear Politics 6.1%, Vote Hub 6.9%, an average of 6.6%. Now, unlike the New Jersey governor's race, where the current polling averages are under 5 points and about 3 out of the 4 averages, in this one, all 4 of the averages show Abigail Spanberger leading by more than 5 points and putting it in the likely category based on the polling data currently out there. There is, I will noticing this race, so there are some similarities to New Jersey, though. For one thing, Winsome Sears and how she's polling, she is polling roughly around 43.5% to 44% of the vote, which is a little bit less than Chitterelli in New Jersey, but she's polling right around 43.5% to 44%, which, as I said in the other video, it's not a very strong position to be in at this current stage of the game for the Republicans if you're hoping to win, especially considering that Abigail Spanberger is breaking 50% in every single polling average. And that's essentially the line that you don't want to cross if you're the opponent of another candidate where they are breaking 50% of the vote. You can win an election depending on how the election system works without breaking 50% of the vote, with third-party voters and with another candidate not getting as high as you. For instance, it's possible in Virginia for Spanberger to win, say, with like 49% if Sears is only getting 47%, and then there's like a libertarian candidate getting like 3.5% to 4% or something. That is mathematically possible. That can happen. That has happened actually before the 2013 governor's race would be a pretty good example of that one, where we saw the Democrat get 47.75%, Ken Cuccinelli, the Republican, 45.23%, but then a third-party candidate got 6.5%, so the election was won without reaching 50%. That is possible, but most of the time, the winning candidate does break 50%. In 2017, the Democrat Ralph Northam defeated Ed Gillespie, the Republican, by 8.9%, getting up to 53.9%. Based on how Winsome Sears is polling, it's looking more like a 2017 governor matchup in Virginia than a 2021 matchup where we saw Glenn Youngkin win by 1.9% against the Democrat Terry McAuliffe, who, for his own credit, despite losing to Youngkin in this race, McAuliffe did get 48.6% of the vote as well, a decently high Democratic floor in the state of Virginia at 48.6. And yes, he did lose, but still. And back in 2013, as I mentioned in that race, Ken Cuccinelli got 45.23%. So I'm bringing this back up because when you look at 2013 getting 45.2, 2017 you saw Gillespie get 44.97, you're looking at these numbers and saying, well, how is Winsome Sears doing in comparison to them? She's running at around 43.7% on average, only getting 44% in Decision Desk HQ, without the undecided voters left out there in the third-party vote as well. Spanberger's right around that number, but actually doing a little bit worse than both Gillespie in 2017 and Cuccinelli in 2013. The polling in 2017 at this point at Gillespie was around 44.4%, so only running about 0.5% better or so than Winsome Sears did, but Ralph Northam, the Democrat, was also only polling at 47.7% of the vote. And the race was also a lot more competitive based on the prediction pollsters as well. Lean Democrat, Tilt Democrat, and Lean Democrat from Cook Politico, Rothenberg Political Report, and Salvador's Crystal Ball. And so that's where things were at this point in time in Virginia in 2017. Northam not getting near that 50% threshold. Whereas in 2025, yes, Sears is roughly about 0.5% down of where Gillespie was, almost a full point down, but still Abigail Spanberger is running about 2.5% better than Northam did. Spanberger already breaking 50% of the vote. And that's the kind of reality. Of course, these are polls. Elections are unpredictable. Like I said in the past video, elections can be very unpredictable. Until the votes are cast, you never really know 100% how things are going to go. But it's clear at this current point in time, Abigail Spanberger is definitely the favorite to win this race. And usually when you see polls where one candidate is breaking 50% of the vote, the odds of the polls being wrong by that much and that candidate ultimately losing is definitely a lot lower than, say, a race where the one candidate's not breaking 50% of the vote and basically, like, you know, anything can happen when there's a lot of undecided vote. And again, I know I've been doing this a lot, but hopefully this is the last time I do it, but just to compare it to New Jersey, where Mikey Sherrill is getting around 48.5% of the vote. She's not breaking 50, so even though she's still leading in that race, there is a mathematical chance for her opponent, Chittarelli, can exceed her number, especially because that 50% threshold has not been met. Whereas in Winsome Sears versus Abigail Spanberger, Winsome Sears can essentially win every single undecided vote that's left out there, but if Abigail Spanberger on election day gets that 50.3% number, then mathematically she just can't be caught if everyone that says they support Spanberger gets out to vote. But that's also a hypothetical. That's usually not how elections work. Usually with the other undecided vote, even if it's a very small number, not every single undecided voter is going to break one way or the other. There's going to be some sort of mix. It can be high or small, but at least 1/10 of that 6% undecided is going to go for Abigail Spanberger, just to make the point even clearer that Winsome Sears is in a very dire situation right now in this governor's race. As a lieutenant governor, who was elected 4 years ago with Glenn Youngkin, Sears, as a general election candidate, really seems to be struggling in this race, and one that Abigail Spanberger not only is leading, but it seems in the final few days may actually start to grow the lead a little bit. Just to show you what I mean on this, we're going to look at the Decision Desk HQ polling average because they have a great chart here that shows what the trends have been like in this race. And this has been one where it actually may have gotten less close as time has gone on. Starting back in January, actually we can go back to January 8th, 2025, it was a very close race. Definitely a lot more undecided voters, people not making their mind up yet. Spanberger had 41.8%, Winsome Sears 41%, so a very close race at this current point in time, and it remained this way for a few days, where there's a poll that came out on January 18th. It became around a 7 to 8 point lead for Spanberger, and then at that point went back down to 4. Then it went down to 8, and then things never really looked back. Into the spring, a 7-point lead for Spanberger. Into getting into the summertime, right around a 7, 8, 9-point lead for Spanberger over Sears. Now we're coming into the fall time. This is where things usually heat up, right around Labor Day and heading into the end of the summertime. This is where things really usually start to get close. And Abigail Spanberger, actually, as Winsome Sears goes up, also goes up. Here, Sears is at 38.1%, Spanberger 46.7%. Now, Sears goes up to 40.9, raising the floor. That had always been the concern over the summer, was Winsome Sears was polling in the high 30s, saying, well, she's going to do better than that. But the polling numbers for her were not looking great. But as she'd gone up, Abigail Spanberger also went up to 47.6% and even up to 49.5% right around the beginning of September and right after Labor Day. So as people, the media attention started to pick up, advertising started to pick up, it seemed Abigail Spanberger's numbers went up roughly about 2 points, even almost 3 points in roughly about a few weeks, while Winsome Sears only went up by about 0.3%. So it seems a lot of undecided voters right around Labor Day that started paying attention seemed to make their decision for Abigail Spanberger in this race. Now, it did go down a little bit for a few days, and Winsome Sears did go up to 41.5, but then that number broke, where Spanberger, right around September 14th, broke 50% of the vote. And really, there's been a little bit of up and downs, but pretty much since then, Spanberger's been hovering right around 50% of the vote, while Winsome Sears has gone up to about 43 and now 44% of the vote heading into the final 2 weeks. I think the question at this current point in time is not the question of whether Abigail Spanberger will defeat Winsome Sears, but by the margin. I'm very confident Abigail Spanberger is going to beat Winsome Earl Sears. Kind of everything I've laid out in this video thus far has led me to that conclusion. It's just the math of this current point in time, when you consider the election environment of 2025 being the way the governor's races usually work, the opposite of the party in the White House, the referendum on how the president is doing, everything spells a very good night for the Democrats. The last time this happened was, as I mentioned, Northam versus Gillespie. Ralph Northam, the Democrat, ended up winning by almost 9 points, and it seems right now, even though it's only a 6-point polling lead for Spanberger over Sears at this current point in time, based on the trends of that election and this one, we may actually see even an expanding margin of that 8.9%, which is interesting because Virginia, a lot of Republicans seemed to vote for Donald Trump in 2024 that did not in 2020 for Joe Biden. But it seems that the Democrats are in for a little bit of a resurgence in Virginia in the governor's election in 2025. Now, I'm not going to talk about the down ballot races for lieutenant governor and attorney general in this video because I think those are a little bit different circumstances, especially with the attorney general's race. But for the governor's side of things, this really seems like a race that the Democrats are in control of, are going to win, and are probably going to win by a pretty sizable margin. The question is going to be what? Is it going to be 6 points? Is it going to be 7? Is it going to be 8? Is it going to be 9? Is it going to break 10? Is it going to go to 11? It's kind of a wide range in this race. I think we're going to see right around where the polling is kind of suggesting. I think we're going to see Winsome Sears get around 44%. And then the question is, what do those 6% that are undecided do? If they split just the way they are with the, we'll say about 2% or so, because I do believe there are third-party candidates, or there are not third-party candidates on the ballot, just write-in candidates, we're probably going to see Spanberger win maybe around 53, 54% of the vote. Sears would go up to about 44, 45%. That would be right around that same 2017 result of around a 9-point win for Spanberger over Sears if that were to happen. Now, could that get a little bit larger for Spanberger? It definitely could. Could it get smaller for Sears? It definitely could. But just when you look at the path of this race and how it's gone and the trends in this race, Abigail Spanberger is the leading candidate in this race. She's got pretty much all the Democrats locked up. She's got a lot of independents locked up in this race, and just really not a lot of leeway here for Winsome Sears in this race to have a legitimate shot at winning this election. She has a chance to maybe make the race closer if the Attorney General's race down ballot ends up having detrimental effects for the Democrats on Election Day. Right now, the polling data shows that race has gotten closer, but as a little bit of a tease, I think the numbers may be a little bit less than the Republicans may be hoping for in that race. That's a little tease for the next video, but I think we're going to see Abigail Spanberger win and by a pretty comfortable margin. Winsome Sears is probably at this point doing damage control to try and get the race as close as possible, but I don't think her pathway to victory is really going to be there. And no surprise, just to do a quick wrap up here, the prediction for this race, I have the state of Virginia voting for Democrat Abigail Spanberger to be the next governor of the Commonwealth over the Republican Winsome Earl Sears. The margin, right around that 8.5 to 9 point margin. It hasn't really moved too much over the last few weeks or so since the last time I did this. I've had it around 8.5 points, now maybe up to 9. Abigail Spanberger is leading in the polls by pretty much what I expected her to. And over the last few weeks or so, there hasn't been too much movement. So I think this race is remaining pretty much where it is. The undecideds, I think, essentially split 60-40, maybe 70-30 for Spanberger over Sears, which brings it right around that 8.5 to 9 point margin. But again, we'll have to wait and see how this all goes. That's why elections are for, and that's why the votes are cast. Just again to briefly let you know, as I've done some other videos as well, some key areas I'm watching for in Virginia on election night are two key areas in particular. I'm watching the northern DC suburbs of Loudoun, Prince William, and Fairfax counties up here. I'm waiting to see how they come out to vote and what their margins are and what their turnout numbers are compared to the last governor's race and compared to the presidential race as well. And I'm looking down here at Virginia Beach. This is an area, the county itself is more of a 50-50 county, that if the Republicans are winning, they could be in business potentially at making this race closer than expected. If the Democrats are winning Virginia Beach and its surrounding Chesapeake County, if those two are going Democratic, we're likely looking at a pretty sizable Democrat win on election night. So those are two key areas to watch for as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Make sure to stay tuned this coming week as I have some very important videos for all the 2025 races. And then next week, I have some very big videos planned for the 2025 elections as well that I know you're going to enjoy. And I hope you're going to come back and watch those. I'm really excited for how those hopefully should turn out. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2025 New York City mayoral election, now with less than 2 weeks to go until election day, where things stand at this current point in time, heading into the last few days of the campaign. So if you've not been covering or following the 2025 New York City mayoral election, where things currently stand is the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, initially was running for re-election as a Democrat, though polls early on showed him having really no chance at winning a Democratic primary. He was very disapproved of in the race. So Adams ultimately decided to run for re-election as an independent and opened up the Democratic primary. As Adams was a Democratic mayor, it opened up the primary for a new Democratic candidate to emerge. And it very quickly became a very competitive primary between Democrat Zohran Mamdani, a New York State Assembly from the 36th District, which is representing the Queens neighborhood of Astoria, and Andrew Cuomo, who was the former governor of the state of New York, who resigned in 2021 and has a lot of scandals following him. The New York City mayoral race was hoping to be Cuomo's comeback into elected office and elected politics. Those were the top two Democrats going at it. And what ultimately ended up happening was on the Democratic primary for New York City, Zohran Mamdani outperformed what many, including myself, my own polling and expectations were for that primary. I thought it was going to be close, but Zohran Mamdani won by over 12 points when everything was said and done, and he became the Democratic nominee. Now, as for Andrew Cuomo, Cuomo decided within a month of losing the primary to launch a third-party bid for New York City mayor as an independent after seeing some early polling numbers which suggested he would be polling at least in second place to Zohran Mamdani in that election. So at the time, right after the primary, it was Mamdani and Cuomo running, with also Mayor Eric Adams also running as an independent, and the Republican nominee from 2021, Curtis Sliwa, winning the Republican nomination again and going to be the Republican nominee for 2025. So that's where things stand in terms of that right after the campaign started. Now, in the last month or so, Eric Adams has dropped out of the race. It is now a three-person race between Zohran Mamdani, Curtis Sliwa, and Andrew Cuomo. Now, obviously, what you've come here to see is how this race is currently looking. And we can look at the polling, where thus far, Zohran Mamdani has a commanding lead in this race over Cuomo and Sliwa. And we have had some polls since Eric Adams dropped out of the race. We've only had about 4 thus far, but they show that Adams dropping out has really not changed the race all that much. The last poll taken before Adams dropped out showed Eric Adams getting roughly around 8% of the vote, where Mamdani had 45, Cuomo 27, and Sliwa 11 points. That was from Beacon Research and Shaw Company, which is the Fox News poll. And now that Adams is out of the race, they have done another poll which showed that Adams still has about 2 to 3% support, even though he dropped out. But Zohran Mamdani's numbers have gone up to 49%, where Cuomo is at 28 and Curtis Sliwa is at 13. The overall averages of this race show a very commanding lead from Mamdani, where Mamdani is at around 45.67% when you take all the polling averages and add them up, essentially. Mamdani is sitting around 45.5 percentage points. Andrew Cuomo is polling in second place, roughly around 30%, around 29.77%, depending on which average you're looking at. While the Republican Curtis Sliwa is currently polling in third, around 16 points in the Decision Desk HQ average, and there's still roughly around 9 points or so, 9% of voters who are undecided in this race. Now, just quick math here will tell you the amount of support that each candidate is getting shows that Zohran Mamdani is very likely to become the next mayor of New York City. Mamdani in a 3-person race is polling at 45% of the vote, which leaves about 55% of the vote left out there that is not currently consolidated behind Zohran Mamdani. But when you just do the math there, that 55% that's left outstanding, Cuomo's only getting roughly 30% of that vote, which at this current point in time, of Cuomo and Sliwa, it's very, very clear that Cuomo is the only one that has even a remote chance of getting close to Mamdani's numbers. Curtis Sliwa does not have any pathway to victory in this race, and the polling data has shown that pretty much all along. For instance, in the most recent poll from Gotham Polling and Analytics, it showed what a 2-person matchup between Mamdani and Cuomo and Mamdani and Sliwa would ultimately look like. For Cuomo versus Mamdani, that should be a relatively close race. Mamdani getting 45%, Cuomo 41%, 15% of voters are undecided. So even in that matchup, Mamdani's leading and could still win that race, but it'd be a lot more competitive. Whereas Mamdani versus Sliwa, it's still a pretty big blowout of a race. 47% for Mamdani, 32% for Sliwa, 22% undecided in that one. So the polling has shown the only way this race gets competitive would be if Curtis Sliwa drops out and it becomes a 2-person race between Cuomo versus Mamdani. And even then, I would still go as far as to say that I expect Zohran Mamdani would win the election between him versus Cuomo, but by a much smaller margin than it's going to happen on election night itself. But just the math right now, Curtis Sliwa in third place, getting around 15% of the vote or so, is already taking a very significant amount of vote away from what could be won by Andrew Cuomo or Zohran Mamdani, so much so that it really does not provide any pathway to victory for Cuomo, and we already know Sliwa has no chance of running. It's also very representative of how well Zohran Mamdani is doing in this race, as I'm about to show you the polling trend in the New York City mayoral race, that Mamdani, in a 3-person race like this, is able to get at least 45% of the vote before the undecided and other voters ultimately decide what to do on election day. He's already getting a very large command of the race at 45%. So just to show you here, this is the Decision Desk HQ polling average of this race, and I think it really does a good job at show you how this race has gone over the course of it. Right after the primary, there were questions of, yes, Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary, but what would the voters in the general election do when Andrew Cuomo would probably have a better chance at winning with a more spread out electorate than just a Democratic primary? And it started with Cuomo actually leading for the first few days over Mamdani 39-25. Now, as time went on, it very quickly became that Zohran Mamdani was the favorite in this race. We saw Mamdani officially overtake Cuomo in the polling around July 2nd, and since then, it has really not looked back at all. Zohran Mamdani's been in the driver's seat in this race. At one point, there were 5 candidates running, so there was a lot of the anti-Zohran Mamdani vote being split among Cuomo, Sliwa, Mayor Adams, and another independent, Jim Waldron. Waldron ultimately drops out of the race around the beginning of September 2nd. Then it becomes a 4-person race of Mamdani versus Cuomo versus Sliwa versus Adams. Now, Cuomo's numbers have not really changed at this point compared to when Mamdani took the lead. Mamdani's numbers have gone up about a point or so. Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams have remained pretty consistent as well. We get to around the beginning of October, it's getting very clear that neither Cuomo, Sliwa, or Adams are going to be able to catch Mamdani with all of them in the race. Eric Adams decides to drop out. He does not necessarily endorse Cuomo or Sliwa. Actually, I think he talked about issues with both of them when dropping out of the race, but that leaves some support left out there to be grabbed by Cuomo and Sliwa. And it seems thus far, a lot of that support, of that 8%, went to Cuomo, because Cuomo went from 26.6% to roughly about 31% over the course of 2 weeks or so once Adams dropped out. Now, Curtis Sliwa did also go up about a point, and then around now he's gone up to about 16.6%, where Cuomo has remained right around 31%. So it seems that Adams' support has gone mostly to Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa. A little bit may have gone to Zohran Mamdani, who went up from 44.6 to about 46.8 around a few days ago. Now it's back down to 45.4 in the polling averages. But this race is really looking like one that, if it was a two-person race, Zohran Mamdani has the chance at potentially losing. But with a three-person race, it definitely seems like a win that will be coming for Zohran Mamdani and likely will not take too long on election night to make that call. And again, as a first-time candidate of this magnitude for New York City mayor, you do have to give Zohran Mamdani a lot of credit as essentially a political outsider, getting 45% of the vote against the past Republican nominee for mayor for 4 years ago and the former governor of the state of New York, two names that are probably very well known, especially Cuomo's name in New York City, and Mamdani is still commanding 45.4% of the vote. So what to make of this race is that the way the race has gone down in this three-person lane, Zohran Mamdani is going to win, and there's not enough vote left out there for Cuomo or Sliwa to match Mamdani's numbers. Even if Andrew Cuomo won every single undecided voter, that would still get him roughly around 5 to 6 points below Zohran Mamdani's number. Now, let's say hypothetically in the next 2 weeks, for some reason, Curtis Sliwa drops out of the race. There's little reporting at all to suggest that even be a possibility. Curtis Sliwa has gone after Andrew Cuomo just as much, if not more, than Zohran Mamdani, and he will not be dropping out of this race according to all reports. But if that were to happen, well, then it becomes a more interesting race, because Sliwa is getting roughly around 17% of the vote if you round up from 16.6. That would give Cuomo a legitimate chance if he can win most of Sliwa's support and making this a more competitive race. But the point's been made all along of a three-person race. There's no way Zohran Mamdani can lose because there's not enough anti-Zohran Mamdani vote, especially when Mamdani is polling so strongly at 45%. There's just not enough vote out there for a three-person race for two opponents of Mamdani to catch him. Now, in a head-to-head matchup, it's possible for Cuomo to win, but even then, I would still say if it's Mamdani versus Cuomo, I actually do think Zohran Mamdani would still win, and probably by around 10 points, due to the fact there are a lot of both independent, Republican, and Democratic voters who disapprove of Andrew Cuomo very heavily, almost as much as Curtis Sliwa, which is funny because a Republican in New York City you would think would not be approved of well at all, but Andrew Cuomo is just as bad as Curtis Sliwa in most opinion polling, and that is really hurting his chances that maybe there's another Democrat running as an independent instead of Andrew Cuomo. Maybe this would be a more competitive race, but Andrew Cuomo has certainly his own likability issues, and that is really hurting him in this race as well as the main opposition to Zohran Mamdani. Now, Cuomo, I think, is still going to do well enough to make this race relatively competitive, but I don't think he's going to be able to get close enough for this race to really get competitive, meaning of the ranking of around a 15-point being a safe margin, I think it's possible we see this race fall under 15 points, but I don't think we're going to see a race that falls under like 7 or 8 points to really be like, ooh, could this race actually get close? I think Zohran Mamdani has this race. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win within the first hour on election night, maybe even within the first half hour, due to the fact Cuomo and Sliwa are just splitting too many votes, and Mamdani already has such a commanding lead of the general election votes that, like he did in the primary, that he also has now for New York City. Now, just to give you an idea of what the primary looked like, as I alluded to this, in 2025, the Democratic primary, Zohran Mamdani ended up winning 56.4% to 43.6% over Andrew Cuomo. of the roughly 1,071,000 voters who voted in that Democratic primary. Definitely a lot higher turnout than it was even back in 2021 for Eric Adams. Now, it was on the first round only around a 7-point victory or so, which is still very significant for Mamdani, but you saw Mamdani doing very well in Queens, you saw him doing very well in Brooklyn, and you saw him winning Manhattan. Now, in the general election, it's going to be interesting because the third place candidate in a lot of these election results was Brad Lander, a more liberal Democrat who was allied with Zohran Mamdani in helping stop Andrew Cuomo in the final days of the campaign. So now in a general election matchup where it'll be Mamdani, Cuomo, and Curtis Sliwa, it seems more likely that the vote will be split against Cuomo and Sliwa against Mamdani. So it's possible we could actually see Zohran Mamdani win Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn by even larger margins than he did in the primary against Cuomo. Now, Cuomo did win the Bronx 52-34, so if we're talking about election night as a potential area that we could maybe see Andrew Cuomo beat Zohran Mamdani in, I think the Bronx is one area that could potentially go his way. We'll have to wait and see how that all unfolds. Another key area is Staten Island, which did vote for Andrew Cuomo 46-38, though in the 2021 New York City mayoral election, Staten Island was the only borough of New York to vote for the Republican Curtis Sliwa. I think it's more likely Staten Island will vote red for Sliwa than for Andrew Cuomo, but that could certainly be a possibility as well. But how this election goes, I think overall, once all the votes are counted, I think we're looking at around a 10 to 15 point win for Zohran Mamdani over Andrew Cuomo. Right now, I have it right around that 14-point mark, and we're looking at an election where I think we see Queens go for Mamdani, we see Brooklyn go for Mamdani, we see Manhattan go for Mamdani. I think those three are pretty much locked in how I think they're going to go. The two wild cards are the Bronx and Staten Island, because Sliwa got 66.5% of the vote, but now with both Mamdani and Cuomo running, I think we're going to see Curtis Sliwa still win Staten Island, but I think it's going to be by a smaller margin due to the fact that I think there will be a lot of voters that will vote for Cuomo as the top choice against Zohran Mamdani to try and stop him becoming mayor. So I think Staten Island goes to Curtis Sliwa, but by a smaller margin. The Bronx, I think overall, we're going to see, I think, Zohran Mamdani win it, but I think this is going to be the closest borough to watch for in terms of a Cuomo versus Mamdani election in the Bronx for who may win this one. So I think the Bronx is going to be close. I think it goes to Mamdani, but I think it goes for him by under 10 points in one of the more closer boroughs to watch. We'll have to wait and see how that ages, though, how that finds out. So bottom line, predicting a Zohran Mamdani Democratic win for New York City mayor in around 13 to 14 points is currently how I have it going right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. I have some exciting videos planned for the next few days and for the next week as well that I think you're really going to enjoy, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I am doing the 2025 Virginia Attorney General election now with less than 2 weeks to go until Election Day, where everything stands, where the polling stands, and how I'm currently predicting this race to go with just a few days remaining in the election. So this Virginia Attorney General's race, is very interesting. It's on the same ballot as the Virginia Governor and Virginia Lieutenant Governor elections. Now, this race was won back in 2021 by the Republican Jason Miyares. He won a super close election against then Democratic Attorney General Mark Herring, winning 50.4% to 49.6%. Now, this was also the only Democrat that was eligible to run for re-election, as the governor and lieutenant governor cannot run for consecutive terms in Virginia's constitution, but the Attorney General can. Now, Jason Miyares, though he did win, he won by the smallest margin of the Republicans of Glenn Youngkin, Winsome Sears, and Miyares. He won by the smallest amount in this race, though he did win. Now for 2025, the expectation was Miyares would be running for re-election against whoever the Democrats nominated, and it was going to be a probably very difficult race for him to win. And the large reason being was, since the beginning of this race, the expectation was Virginia would probably be going Democratic at the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general level due to the fact that the off-year presidential or off-year governor elections following the presidential race usually go the opposite of the party in the White House. And seeing as Donald Trump is the Republican president, it would seem more likely than not the Democrats in a state that voted for Kamala Harris by about 6 points in 2024 would be electing a new Democratic Attorney General. However, something very interesting happened in this race, where Jay Jones, who won the Democratic primary, had some scandals break towards the end of the campaign regarding comments he made about a political opponent. I don't want to go into it too much in this video because I'm not sure there are things I can say or not that may be flagged or anything like that. So if you want to learn more about it, there's certainly great resources online on YouTube and on other websites and such that go over it. But it really changed the race. We're now in the polling averages, which beforehand showed Jay Jones was leading over Jason Miyares and by a pretty considerable amount. The last few polls taken before the text message scandal happened showed Miyares leading 49 to 43, 49 to 45 in the Republican Trafalgar poll, 51 to 45 in the Washington Post poll, A2 Insights 49 to 46. Every single poll except for one Republican pollster that I've never even heard of, On Message Inc., had Jay Jones defeating Jason Miyares. And now, after the text, things have certainly changed. Now it shows that Jason Miyares is leading in most of the polls, and the current polling averages, Miyares is now leading and slightly favored to win this race. Though this race is still very close and very competitive, I'm going to be talking about that more in this video. The most recent polling averages from Decision Desk HQ have Miyares at 47.1, Jay Jones 44.4, with 8.5% of voters saying they are other or undecided. Real Clear Politics shows a similar matchup of 46.5 to 44, with 9.5% undecided, and VoteHub has Miyares at 46, Jay Jones 45.5, 8.5% undecided, only a 0.5% lead. So across these three polling averages, there is an average of 1.9% lead for Jason Miyares. And this thus far is tracking to be the closest election we're watching in the 2025 cycle, even closer than the New Jersey governor's race, which for a while was presumed to be the closest election. It seems this one has certainly usurped it, and now is going to be the main big one to watch for in terms of competitiveness. But this race is still very interesting now that the scandals have leaked. It still is potentially up in the air here, because a very interesting trend that's happened here is most of the polls that have come out involving Jason Miyares versus Jay Jones, it does need to be noted, they are Republican-aligned pollsters. So just to give you an idea here, just a quick count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 polls have come out for this governor's race, or for the Attorney General's race, in Virginia. 10 polls. There are only 1, 2, 3 Democratic polls in this group. The rest are either Republican or, in Virginia Commonwealth University's case, nonpartisan. But the Republican ones could potentially be messing up the numbers a little bit. Usually the rule of thumb I use is that when it's a partisan poll, I shift it about 5 points in the opposite direction of the pollster to account for the bias of the poll. So this 7-point lead from Qantas Insights for Miyares, it essentially for me means it's about a 2-point lead for Miyares. Where in this Democratic internal, which shows Jones leading by 5, that would essentially be a tied race. Now, some of these polls, once that 5-point rule is put into effect, Jason Miyares and Jay Jones are either tied or Jay Jones could be leading in a few. Whereas in some instances, Jason Miyares is still leading by outside that margin. But where the race is currently right now, it certainly seems the numbers have flipped in Jason Miyares' direction, and he certainly has a much stronger chance to win. But there isn't a 0 chance that Jay Jones can't actually win this race. And I know after the scandal did break, if you have been following the news on Jay Jones' scandal, it may be crazy to even hear that he could potentially win this race with everything that's happened in the last few weeks or so. But Jay Jones does mathematically have a chance of pulling this out, and I'll explain. The reason being is the amount of voters that are currently committed and not committed at this point to supporting Jason Miyares and Jay Jones. So in this race, and I just want to be totally sure here, I just want to double check on the results, there are only 2 candidates on the ballot, Jason Miyares and Jay Jones. And when I just showed you the polling here, there's still roughly about 9% of voters that are saying they are voting other or undecided at this current point in time. Now, that could mean one of 2 things, and the past videos I've done the last 2 days, I've also talked about this as well. That could mean the voters are truly undecided, they're not sure what they're going to do, or they have made up their mind and they just don't want to say to a pollster who they are supporting. This kind of gets talked about as like the hidden Trump vote that we saw in 2016, 2020, and 2024. This phenomenon can exist in other political races as well. And this race seems to be a potential prime opportunity for that. Because Jason Mayara's leading in the polling data at all is obviously a great sign for him and the Republicans, especially when you go and look at the other Virginia races, like the governor's race. It's really not even that close at this point. Abigail Spanberger is not only leading in the polling averages for this race over Winsome Sears, but she's already breaking 50% of the vote. Winsome Sears around 43.5%, not even close to the numbers, off about 3 points or so from where Mayara's is. So she's not really in a great position. The lieutenant governor's race in Virginia, I'm planning to do a more in-depth video on as well. But even here, Gonzalo Hofstra, the Democrats, at 48%, John Reed, the Republican, at 43.7%, right around the same numbers that Winsome Sears is at. That race is looking to be a pretty similar direction as well. Whereas this one, Jason Mayara clearly has the highest floor of support for the three top Republican races, Virginia, governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Mayara has the highest floor of support, according to the polling, and has the best chance to win. Though, it's very important to note the numbers he does have. On average, he has 46.5%. The chart that I'm going to be using the most, Decision Desk HQ, has him at 47.1%. And the clear direction on this race is that Jason Mayara, the incumbent, now has a chance to win, and may even be narrowly favored to win this race. But Jay Jones was leading for a very long time, even getting around 49% or so throughout most of August. Once Labor Day hit, the race got a lot closer. Jones fell about 45%. Mayara slowly started to gain up ground, but Mayara wasn't really doing too much better than both Winsome Sears and John Reed in their respective races. It's only once the scandal broke that Jones's numbers really started to go down. Mayara's numbers started to exceed that 44% number, and once the scandal really started to take hold in the polling, that's when Mayara's numbers jumped. Jones started going down, Mayara started going up. Though at this point in time, it's still 2 weeks to go, Mayara's at 47.1%. Jones is clearly going down to 44.4% committed support. This race is still not technically out of the woods for the Democrats to win. And again, as I mentioned, it's because of that other undecided vote. There's still 9% of respondents who are either undecided or not saying who they are supporting right now. Now, it is totally possible that these undecided voters could be appalled by what Jay Jones said and may all come out to vote for Jason Mayara, or could even potentially vote Democrat for governor and lieutenant governor and maybe leave this race blank if they really don't like Jay Jones. But what I also think is a legitimate possibility is we're expecting close to double-digit wins in the governor's race and the lieutenant governor's race in Virginia for the Democrats. Do those voters say they don't like what Jay Jones said, but they're going to quietly vote for Jay Jones anyway and basically never talk about it and then let the election results show where things are? That is a legitimate possibility. And even though Jason Mayara, I think, will be the best performing Republican on election night, probably outperforming Winsome Sears and John Reed's numbers by at least about 2% according to the polls, there is still enough of an opening here. If Jason Mayara only gets around 47% on election night, Jay Jones will probably be winning this race. The question is going to be, can there be enough vote left out there for Jay Jones for him to consolidate that support and win this race? So right now, this current point in time, I think Jason Mayara is clearly leading in the polls. It's a very narrow lead, though, and the race has certainly flipped. But I don't think it's impossible that after Election Day, if we're talking about the next morning after, that Jay Jones won a very narrow upset win over Jason Mayara. I don't really think it would be a shock due to the fact the numbers are there. There are enough undecided voters left out there to give Jay Jones the win. The question is going to be, what do they do? Because Mayara's at 46.5, Jones at 44.6 clearly shows there are a lot of voters whose minds are either not yet made up or know what they're going to do and are just not saying it. And when the Democrats for governor and lieutenant governor are probably going to get at least 51, 52% of the vote, could the attorney general candidate Jay Jones get up to 48, 49, maybe run about 3 or 4 points behind what the other Democrats are doing, especially if we're wrong about the governor's race or the lieutenant governor's race and the Democrats outperform, maybe they win by 10 or 11 points. If that happens, could they actually drag Jay Jones essentially across the finish line where they're winning by 10 points, but due to the scandals, Jay Jones wins by maybe 1 or 2? Could that be a possibility? And I'm here to tell you today, I think it legitimately could. Right now, I would narrowly give this race to Jason Mayares, and in this election prediction, I do have Jason Mayares narrowly winning the Virginia's Attorney General race by around a 1.5 to 1 point margin, even under 1 point, where I currently have it right now. But I'm watching this race very closely in the final few days of this campaign, because though I think this race has certainly gone in the momentum and direction of Jason Mayares, and it's hard to imagine the idea of Jay Jones winning this race after everything that's happened, I think there's enough undecided vote out there that this race is not completely out of the woods for the Democrats here, and that Jay Jones, despite the scandal, may be able to pull off a very narrow upset, but it's going to be pretty contingent on if Abigail Spanberger and Ghazal Hashmi can drag Jay Jones across the finish line, get enough votes in their races down ballot to help out Jay Jones nearly defeat the only Republican incumbent running on the ticket. If this scandal did not break, I think Jay Jones would probably be winning by similar margins, around 6 to 7% or so. But with the scandal breaking, I think Jason Mayares is narrowly favored to win. But I do not think it is a 100% locked-in win for Mayares. And I think if Jay Jones does win on election night, it would be a little bit surprising, but I don't think it would be something I'd necessarily be totally shocked by because, again, the undecided vote is there. 46 to 44 is not a polling number to be 100% guaranteed by. It's not really too dissimilar to what Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump was either, heading into the 2016 presidential election, where the polling numbers were, a lot of polls showed Hillary leading Trump 46-44, 47-44. There was a lot of vote left out there for Trump to win with undecided voters that the polls missed, and this race, at very least, leaves open that possibility. Will that come to fruition? We'll have to wait and see. That's what Election Day is for. But in a state like Virginia, where the Democrats, we know, are going to win the governor's race, going to win the lieutenant governor's race, and voted for Harris by 6 points just back in November, the possibility of enough of them voting for Jay Jones so he can narrowly win by around 1 point, I really don't think is too crazy of a possibility, especially considering Spanberger may be winning by close to 10 points on election night. Still, though, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts. Also, remember to stay tuned because I have some very important videos coming out in the next week or so that I think you're really going to enjoy. I'm also in the next few days doing a video on California's Proposition 50, I believe it is, that I've not covered yet in any video on my channel. So make sure to check that one out. I'm going to be very excited to post that one. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over the Virginia Lieutenant Governor election, how things currently stand right now, what the polling data is showing, and what my updated prediction is for this race with now less than 2 weeks to go until Election Day. So this is going to be a very interesting race to watch as the Democrat Ghazal Hashmi is facing off against the Republican John Reed in this race. Now, Virginia is an interesting state right now because you have the governor's race, which is certainly looking to be trending towards the Democrats at this current point in time. The attorney general's race with the scandals involving Jay Jones, that race looks like it's going to be very, very close. Jason Mayares narrowly has a lead in the polling right now, but that's going to be a very close race. The lieutenant governor's race is kind of getting a little bit swept under the radar between Hashmi and Reed and how that's currently going. So in today's video covering this race, this is how we got to this race. Obviously, the lieutenant governor in Virginia right now is currently Winsome Earl Sears. Now, she obviously has elected to run for governor, so the lieutenant governor position is open, and the Republican nominee is the former WRVA radio host, John Reed, who, interestingly enough, will be Virginia's first openly gay lieutenant governor if he does end up winning. He is the Republican candidate. Now, on the Democratic side, the Democratic nominee is State Senator Ghazal Hashmi, who would also make history being Virginia's first Asian and Muslim lieutenant governor if she is elected. So regardless of which candidate wins, there's certainly going to be a bit of history breaking in Virginia in this race. Now, there has been some important scandals, for instance, the Attorney General's race. At the start of this campaign, there was some scandals as well involving John Reed at the start of the race, where there was some backlash from the Republican Party when Glenn Youngkin would support the nominees on the ticket and some stuff involving John Reed and his campaign and such. I'm not going to go into it too much in this video because it doesn't really seem to be hurting John Reed too much in this race compared to some of the other Republicans running on the office in Virginia in this race, certainly not as much as like Jay Jones, but there is a little bit of scandal involving John Reed as well that could play a potential significant role as well in this race. But as for the general election where things are currently going, State Navigate has this race listed as likely for the Democrats. The polling data currently shows a actually pretty decently competitive race when you consider it to the governor's race that is happening at the top of the ticket. Ghazala Hashmi has 48% of the vote. John Reed has 43.7%, and undecided is currently 8.3% in the Decision Desk headquarters polling average. And I'll be going to the chart in just one second and seeing how this race has mapped out. Now, at 4.3% lead for Hashmi over John Reed, it's interesting because this is actually, according to the polls, the second most competitive race in Virginia. Whereas the governor's race is currently the most lopsided in favor of the Democrats, this race is the second closest after the Attorney General's race in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, for this one, what's interesting about this is not necessarily that John Reed is doing better than the other Republicans, doing better than Winsome Sears anyway. Jason Mayara's, that race is kind of a special circumstance with the scandals involving Jay Jones, whereas this lieutenant governor's race is kind of more shaping up to be like the governor's one. John Reed getting 43.7% is not really all that different from what Winsome Sears is currently getting in this race. Winsome Sears in her polling average is getting around 43.5% when you average all the averages out. Just to cite Decision Desk HQ, because that's the one we're using for the lieutenant governor's race as well, here Sears has about 43.5%. And if you look at the lieutenant governor, Reed has 43.7%. So Reed and Sears are essentially running about the same in the polling averages for how they are both doing in these respective races. The difference here is that Ghazala Hashmi is running about 2 points behind what Abigail Spanberger is doing. Hashmi having only 48% compared to Spanberger's 50% or so, and even over 50%, depending on the average that you are looking at. So this race isn't really a situation where the Republican candidate is doing better than the governor's race, but the Democrat candidate is currently underperforming by about 2 points. But what's interesting in this race is that there is still roughly 8.3% that is undecided, and given that the governor's race is expected to be a pretty sizable Democratic win, there's nothing really to assume that the lieutenant governor's race won't be any different, as usually the lieutenant governor's race pretty much votes in lockstep with the governor's race as well, unless there's a very special circumstance that could change the race, like what happened with the Attorney General election there. I believe we have, let me see if I can find the 2021 elections. I want to see if I have the results from that one. The 2021 race wasn't all that different from the governor's race as well. Youngkin won 50.6 to 48.6 for governor. And I don't think I have it up here, but the race wasn't that different on the lieutenant governor's race as well. Maybe a difference of like less than half a percentage point, where the attorney general one was closer. And then in 2017, with Ed Gillespie and the Republicans in that one, that race also went to the Democrats as well for Mark Herring, but that was more of a slightly more competitive race, but the Democrats won there. So unless there's a big scandal, like what's happening in the Attorney General's race, the governor election and lieutenant governor election are probably going to vote relatively in lockstep. The only difference between this one, this one and the governor's race is there's more undecided vote left out for grabs here, where there's still 8.3% who say they're undecided. In the governor's race, there's about 6% who say they are undecided. And those 2% that are undecided on the governor's race that are undecided in lieutenant governor essentially all went for Abigail Spanberger when you compare the two polling averages at this current point in time. So that's where things stand. And that's why when you look at these numbers, that's why I say very strongly that I think Ghazala Hashmi is going to win, and that she's probably going to win by a relatively similar number to what Abigail Spanberger does. It's because John Reed really is not doing any better than Winsome Sears, not really doing better at all, and only about 0.2% difference does not give me much confidence in saying that he will outperform Winsome Sears in this election. More of Ghazala Hashmi in the polls is currently underperforming, but I think we're going to see her get relatively similar to Spanberger's margins. The only way Reed could really outperform is if Jason Mayara's and Jay Jones, if that race ends up not being a isolated situation, and Mayara's ends up rising the Republican vote totals for the governor and lieutenant governor's race in kind of a surprising, not really expected move to happen. but even then, I'm really not expecting that to happen. Even in the Republican polls that have come out in the last week or so, which again, the rule of thumb I usually use is a partisan poll I shift in 5 points in the opposite direction to account for the bias of the poll. This Republican poll from Qantas has Hashmi up by about 4 points, and using that 5-point rule, this would be about a 9-point lead for Hashmi over Reid, getting into the same sort of category of what the governor's race is, and I think that's going to be the case. Just looking at the polling average here, this race, though, in the polling average has been a little bit more competitive, but again, a large reason being is that Hashmi is not reaching the highs that Abigail Spanberger is in these polls. But this race has never really been too much in doubt about who's leading. It started out in the summertime throughout July with Hashmi leading Reid by about 10 points. Moving into August, one poll is done, it goes down to 5 points. A little bit more of a competitive race, roughly 3 points or 3 points back towards the end of August, beginning of September. But again, look at the vote totals, 42.7, 39.3, a lot of undecided voters not knowing who these two candidates are too well. As we move past Labor Day, get into September and October, the numbers remain pretty close as a lot of undecided voters remain. But now as we're getting closer and closer to Election Day, both candidates' numbers are going up. Hashmi's, though, seem to accelerate at a much more rate than Reid does, where now Hashmi finds herself at about 48%, John Reid finds himself at 43.7%. Though Reid's numbers have gone up in the last about week or so, it seems they've more stagnated, whereas Hashmi's numbers are starting to trend up a little bit in the final few days as well. What this means for Election Day, we're going to have to wait and see, obviously, on Election Day how the results come in, how that all plays out. But it looks like Azal Hashmi is trending to run very similarly to the governor's race. John Reid's looking more to be in line with Winsome Sears. I don't think it's necessarily impossible that John Reid maybe outperforms Winsome Sears and maybe loses to Ghazala Hashmi by less than Winsome Sears will lose to Abigail Spanberger. Essentially, the polling data right now suggests that John Reid should lose to Hashmi about 2 points less than Spanberger will lose to Winsome Sears. That's certainly a possibility. But in terms of does John Reid, for instance, have a chance to win because he's outperforming Winsome Sears, I don't think that's going to be a case at all. I think Ghazala Hashmi and Abigail Spanberger are both going to win on Election Day. Though is it possible maybe Reid gets up to like 45, 46% of the vote, where Winsome Sears is around 43, 44. I think that certainly is a possibility to watch for on election night. But yeah, this race is an interesting one because it's not getting talked about too much. There's still a good amount of undecided voters left out there where there is a mathematical possibility John Reid could win this race. But given all the factors in this race, off-year governor election right after the presidential race, the opposite political party in the White House usually does well. Democrats are favored in this race. Kamala Harris just won the state of Virginia in 2024 in November by about 6 points. I don't think we're going to see this race go red. I don't think we're going to see any of the Virginia races go red except for the Attorney General's race, maybe because of the scandal with Jay Jones. I think the Democrats are going to win here. The question is just going to be what the margin ends up being. So for Virginia, I think Azal Hashmi obviously is going to win. I think she's going to win by a likely Democratic margin, which is in between 5 points and 15 points. I do think she's going to perform about a point or so less than Abigail Spanberger, so I think we're going to see Hashmi win over John Reid by about 7.5 to 8 points or so, right around where Spanberger is currently tracking in my predictions to win by about 8.5 to 9. I think we're going to see Hashmi win by about 7.5 to 8 as of today. A race that's going to go under the radar. Not too many people are expecting to be too competitive, and I think the Democrats will win here as well in Virginia. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts. Also stay tuned because my next video tomorrow is going to be about California Proposition 50, which I have not yet done a video covering, so you're going to want to watch that one. That should be a very interesting video for you all. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm very excited because I'm going over the Proposition 50 in California that is up in the November 4th, 2025 election ballot. This is the first video I've done on my channel covering Prop 50 and what my election prediction is for this race. So I'm very excited to go over it. In this video I'm going to do my best to explain what it is, break it all down, go over the recent polling data, and how I think this race is going to end up going. So just to give you an idea here, for Prop 50, there's essentially two sides in this. Those who are going to vote to pass Proposition 50 in California and reject it. And the people who want it to pass mostly are the Democrats, and the side that don't want it to pass so much is the Republicans. Now, what Proposition 50 is for California is known as the Election Rigging Response Act, which is a constitutional amendment that is appearing as a special election on the ballot in the state of California on November 4th, and the special election was put out on the ballot by the California State Legislature and on behalf of California Governor Gavin Newsom in response to the 2025 Texas redistricting that redraw Texas's congressional map in favor of adding 5 new districts to be won by the Republicans in the 2026 midterms that President Trump has been pushing for in both Texas and several Republican states around the country, trying to tilt the House map for 2026 more in the Republicans' favor so that Republicans can keep the House red in 2026 and try and keep President Trump's agenda and core policy goals going through 2026 or through 2027 and heading into 2028 as well. What this proposition will do, if passed, it will allow the state to use a new legislature-drawn congressional district map for the 2026, 2028, and 2030 elections instead of the one that's drawn by the bipartisan California Citizens Redistricting Commission. So that is a nonpartisan redistricting commission that drew the California House map. The Democrats and Gavin Newsom want to get rid of that commission and have the state legislature draw a new map to target out 4 or 5 Republican seats and try and get more Democratic ones in there to help level the playing field and help Democrats out for 2026 in response to what President Trump did in the state of Texas and around the country. The map defined in Proposition 50 is a Democratic gerrymander redistricting intended to offset Republican-favored gerrymandering redistricting in Texas. It redraws several Central Valley and Southern California districts to incorporate larger shares of Democratic-leaning urban and suburban voters, while reducing Republican registration advantages in multiple swing areas and converting several previously competitive or Republican-held seats into safely Democratic ones. Now, for this channel, if you're a new viewer, obviously you won't know this, but if you're a longtime viewer, such as before the 2024 election, you'll remember I covered the state of California a lot in the few days and weeks after the 2024 election, because California had a few very close House races that were left uncalled for a few days as more of the votes came in. You may remember down here in California 45, it only voted for the Democrat Derek Tran over the Republican Michelle Steele by 0.2%. California 13, Adam Gray, the Democrat, defeated the Republican incumbent John Duarte by 0.089%, literally just a few handful of votes. So 2 very close races there that flipped blue. And then California 41 with Kenny Calvert only voted about 3.4% for the Republicans in that district, and some close districts in California 49 and 47 as well. So what this Proposition 50 is going to do is it's going to, if passed, the Democratic state legislature will pass a new map, and essentially what it's going to do is make some of these Republican districts pretty much automatic Democratic flips, while at the same time also shore up a lot of districts that are very close and pretty much cement some of them for the Democrats as well. Which is why you're seeing a lot of Democrats so adamantly be in favor of this, while so many Republicans are against it. Now, it also does give a proposed map that the Democrats are seeking to do, in which it targets 5 Republican seats. California 1 with Doug LaMalfa, California 9 with California 3, with Kevin Kiley, David Valadao in California 22, Ken Calvert in California 41, and Darrell Issa in California 48 is the proposed map that the Republicans are seen to be attempted to be drawn out by the Democratic map. The proposed map is also expected to cement a lot of the Democrats and make their districts more blue. For California 9, Josh Harder, California 13, Adam Gray, Jim Costa, California 21, George Whitesides, California 27, Derek Tran, California 45, Dave Min, California 47, and Mike Levin, California 49. Not a coincidence, a lot of the races I talked about being very close in 2024 are the races that the new map would hope to try and cement for the Democrats and give them more of a stronger chance at winning those districts. Especially in 2026, a midterm election, which based on the historical expectations of midterms would likely be more Democratic than 2024 was, and even 2022 was with the Democratic president at the time, Joe Biden, having a midterm. So that's what the map is seeking to do for this race. Now, there was some litigation and such, but it got on the ballot, and now where do things stand? There are a lot of people that are in favor of this and a lot of people who are against this. Pretty much every single Democrat is in favor, including some very notable names. Former President Barack Obama, former Vice President Kamala Harris, Eric Holder, the former Attorney General Xavier Becerra, the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services under Joe Biden, have all endorsed this federally. For Senators Cory Booker, Alex Padilla, California, Adam Schiff, California, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts, have endorsed this. Several U.S. representatives, including the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, have supported this bill or amendment as well. And several Democrats statewide and notable individuals as well in the state support this proposition. On the Republican side, several Republicans have come out now against this proposition, including several U.S. representatives, especially a lot of Republican representatives who may potentially be losing their districts as well, like Darrell Issa, Ken Calvert. They are out against this as well. The main face that's been leading the anti-opposition to this is actually the former governor and Hollywood actor Arnold Schwarzenegger, the 38th governor of California. He's been the main opposition voice for this proposition as well. And lots of other local officials and organizations as well have come out against this proposition for the GOP. Now, for the polling itself, this is where things get interesting. Not a ton of polling data has been done thus far, but the most recent polling data came from CBS News and YouGov in between October 16th and 21st. So as of the time I'm recording this video, just about a day ago, this came out, and it shows a pretty lopsided lead for the support, aka for the Democrats, in this. And the phrasing was, if the election were held today, how would you vote on Proposition 50, which authorizes temporary changes to congressional district maps in response to Texas partisan redistricting? 62% of respondents say they support it, while 38% say they oppose it. That's very significant. Now, the last poll from the end of September and beginning of October was from the Republican pollster Coefficient. And even still in the Republican poll, it showed the Democratic pro side leading 54 to 36 in that regard. In the short phrasing of it, in the long phrasing of it, relatively similar, 56-39, people supporting that one. Emerson College, whose poll was back in September, they're obviously a very reputable polling source. They have support at 51, not support 34, 15% undecided. The last time that the pro side was not winning was from the Citron Center Possibility Lab Politico from back in July, where it was 64-36 in opposition to this move. Though it seems as time has gone on, that poll is looking more and more like an outlier, and the pro side is more expected to win. And I think, obviously, with ballot questions and state amendments, constitutional amendments, things can be kind of tricky sometimes, especially with how these bills are worded for the ballot on elections. Obviously, the wording can be very difficult and tricky for people to understand, especially if people do not spend a ton of time researching it or are politically involved as much. It may be a little bit more difficult for them to know exactly what this does, but when you see 62-38 support to oppose, I think it really comes down to the California politics of it all, which when you look at it, California voted for President Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by roughly 20 points, 20.1%. Now, Harris was from the state of California. Back in 2020, in a more blue election, Joe Biden won the state over Donald Trump by about 29.2%. California is one of the most safe Democratic states in all of the United States, though it did trend about 9 points or so towards President Trump in 2024. It was still a safe Democratic state. When you look at the most recent numbers from CBS News and YouGov, 62-38, that's about a 22-point lead from CBS News and YouGov for the support side, for the Democratic side, which again suggests the Democratic safe state of California seems to be supporting this measure pretty much right along those partisan lines of how the presidential elections in California usually go. And there's a lot to make about this proposition, how it's worded, who supports it, who doesn't support it. But at the bottom line, what the Democratic governor Gavin Newsom has done is he really brought this forward and framed it as a way to stick up against President Trump and the Republicans in D.C. who are trying to redistrict the other states' maps, and is using this as a way to kind of fight back against the president. And when you think about California, which, as I mentioned, voted overwhelmingly Democratic for Kamala Harris, clearly a state that is not a big fan of the Republican president, when Newsom has so adamantly gone after the president, the Republicans, on this proposition and essentially made it a, if you do this, it will be a big sort of fight against, I don't want to say what I was actually thinking, I'll say a big fight against President Trump and the Republicans in Washington by getting a lot of these Republicans out and drawing in some new Democrats. Yes, it'll be breaking the traditional way in which we do these congressional maps, but it'll be essentially a big push from President Trump and the Republicans. This is a way that Democratic voters and a lot of independent voters in California are hearing this. They like it. They like fighting against the president and the national Republicans. And that's why this proposition today seems so overwhelmingly supported by a majority of the California voters in this election. Now, also will be interesting to watch for is the overall number of votes, the voter turnout. This election is obviously not going to be a presidential race, but back in 2021, this is also what's interesting is that in 2025, you have the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. Those races going on, the mayoral race in New York City. But a lot of people may forget, back in 2021, there was also a California race that was on the ballot, and that was the recall election against Gavin Newsom, where voters in California, a lot of Republican voters especially, were trying very hard to recall the governor and essentially get him out of office. And what ultimately happened was it became more of a nationalized race of Democrats versus Republicans, and Gavin Newsom ended up winning by 23.7% in a very safe margin. So now in 2025, with Proposition 50, it's going to be essentially another type of election in the off-year presidential election right after, where it's going to be essentially Gavin Newsom and the Democrats versus the Republicans in this race. The Republicans are fighting to keep those races in those close districts Republican, while the Democrats are fighting to help out the Democrats flip these races blue and give them a more competitive advantage in California for the 2026 midterms. And thus far, the polling data shows there's not really a lot of leeway. The Democrats are breaking 50% in every single poll except for about 2, and that the Democrats are on their way for Proposition 50 passing. So to make a prediction in this race, I think we're going to see the Democratic side win, which is the voting to pass Proposition 50 instead of the GOP's rejecting Proposition 50. I think we're going to see it pass. I think we're going to see the Democrats win. And I think we're going to see it pass by more than that 15% number, which on the rating scale that we use, 15% margin of victory or more is considered a safe, solid Democratic win. And I think we're going to see Proposition 50 pass by more than 15 points. I think we're going to see it pass right around that 22 point number the polls are currently suggesting. I don't think it's going to waver too much from that. I think we're going to see the Democrats win. I wouldn't shock to see pretty high turnout for just a proposition, but I think we're going to see Democrats win and win by a safe, solid Democratic margin of around 22 points. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I broke down Proposition 50, did the best I can. Hopefully, if you have any questions or any comments you want to leave, please leave them down in the comment section below. There's also a lot of great information out there about Proposition 50 if you want to learn more about it, but hopefully I did my best to explain it and hope that all made sense. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe. Again, this is the first video I've done covering Proposition 50, so I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to stay tuned. I have some other great videos coming out this week and the next few days leading into the 2025 elections. I think you're going to really enjoy. At least I hope that you will. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.